I'll create a realistic 4-chapter story based on your specifications for bullied all his life for being overweight. Jake turned it all around. Set in New York during the late 90s. Each chapter will be approximately 1,100 words, focusing on Jake's emotional journey and personal transformation through his culinary talents. Chapter 1. The Weight of Words. The hallways of Westbrook High seemed to narrow whenever Jake Matthews walked through them. At 17, he had mastered the art of making himself smaller. Shoulders hunched, eyes down, steps quick but quiet. Not that it helped much. His size made him impossible to miss, a target that never moved. "Hey, Jumbo Jake! Earthquake warning!" Trevor Wilson's voice echoed down the corridor, followed by snickers that rippled through the morning crowd like a wave. Jake forced a smile, his standard defense mechanism. Yeah, better evacuate the building," he replied, patting his own stomach with feigned pride. He'd learned early that if he laughed at himself first, sometimes, just sometimes, they'd laugh with him instead of at him. It was October 1998, and the New York air carried the first bite of autumn. Jake pulled his oversized hoodie tighter as he ducked into his sanctuary, the art classroom, which was mercifully empty this early. Well, almost empty. "Morning, Jake," said a soft voice from the corner. Sarah Chen sat by the window, light filtering through her dark hair as she sketched something in her notebook. Jake's heart performed its usual acrobatics. "Hey, Sarah," he managed, settling his bulk into the desk farthest from her, close enough to steal glances, far enough to avoid scrutiny. Sarah was everything Jake wasn't: graceful, confident, appreciated. She moved through the school with an easy smile that seemed genuine rather than defensive. They weren't friends, not really, but she was the only person who consistently acknowledged his existence without mockery. Art class was Jake's second favorite period, right after lunch. Not because he ate during lunch. In fact, he rarely did, afraid of providing more ammunition to his tormentors. No, lunch hour was when he slipped into the empty home economics kitchen, where Mrs. Gonzalez, recognizing something in him that others missed, allowed him to experiment with recipes. That afternoon, as he carefully folded herbs into a delicate omelette, Mrs. Gonzalez watched from her desk. "You have a gift, Jake," she said, not for the first time. "Cooking isn't just about following recipes. It's about instinct, feeling. You have that." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with praise he didn't know how to accept. "It's just eggs." "It's never just eggs," Mrs. Gonzalez replied, sliding a brochure across the counter toward him. "The Young Chef's Challenge. You should enter." Jake stared at the glossy paper featuring smiling teenagers in pristine white aprons. A culinary competition for high school students, with the grand prize being a scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America and an apprenticeship at Bellini's, one of New York's most celebrated restaurants. "Those kids don't look like me," he said quietly. Mrs. Gonzalez's expression softened. "Food doesn't care what the chef looks like, Jake. Only what's in their heart and hands." Later that night, in the cramped apartment he shared with his mother in Queens, Jake stared at the brochure again. The deadline was in 2 weeks. Contestants would progress through 3 rounds of competition, culminating in a final showcase at the Manhattan Culinary Exhibition. His mother, exhausted from her double shift at the diner, noticed the paper in his hands. "What's that, honey?" Jake almost hid it away, but something stopped him. A cooking competition. Ellen Matthews settled beside him on their worn couch, her eyes, the same deep brown as Jake's, scanning the details. "You should do it," she said simply. "Mom, be real. Look at these kids. They're all what? Passionate about cooking? So are you." She took his hand, the one that bore a small burn from that afternoon's cooking experiment. "Your father had the same gift, you know." Jake's father had left when he was 8, but Jake still remembered Sunday mornings in their tiny kitchen, watching him transform simple ingredients into magic. "He didn't stick around to teach me much," Jake muttered. "No, he didn't," his mother agreed. "But some things you don't learn, they're in your blood." She tapped the brochure. "This could be your ticket, Jake, to something better." That night, As the city hummed outside his window, Jake lay awake thinking about kitchens and competitions and Sarah Chen's smile, about Trevor's taunts and the constant weight of others' judgment, about his mother's tired eyes and the way she still believed in him. The next day, he found himself lingering after the final bell, staring at the bulletin board outside the school counselor's office where the competition flyer was posted. The entry form was simple: name, school, a brief statement about why you wanted to compete. "You thinking of entering?" Jake startled, turning to find Sarah standing beside him, her gaze on the flyer. "Me? No, he began automatically, then stopped. "Maybe, I don't know." Sarah tilted her head. "I've seen you sometimes, you know, in the home EC kitchen during lunch." When Jake's expression shifted to panic, she added quickly, "I have independent study in the darkroom across the hall. The smell of your cooking beats darkroom chemicals any day." Jake felt his face warm. "You could smell that. Half the hallway can. It's torturous, actually," she said with a small laugh. "Why don't you ever bring any to share?" The question caught him off guard. Why didn't he? Because food was private, safe, because offering something he made to others meant they could reject him. "Never thought anyone would want it," he admitted. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out a pencil, handing it to him. "I would," she said simply. "You should fill this out." Their fingers brushed as he took the pencil, and for a moment, Jake felt lighter than he had in years. That evening, he completed the application, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote his reason for entering. "Because food is the only language I know that doesn't judge me before I've spoken." When the acceptance email arrived a week later, Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. Round 1 would begin in 3 weeks. 20 contestants, 1 dish. 5 would be eliminated. As Jake closed his laptop, the familiar voice of doubt whispered that he was setting himself up for public humiliation. But for once, another voice spoke louder, one that sounded strangely like his father's, like Mrs. Gonzalez's, like his mother's, and maybe, just maybe, a little like his own. It said simply, "Try anyway." Chapter 2. Heat and Pressure. The industrial kitchen of the Manhattan Culinary School buzzed with nervous energy as 19 contestants arranged their stations. Jake, assigned to the far corner, methodically unpacked his knife roll, the only professional equipment he owned, a birthday gift from his mother, who had saved for months to afford it. "Contestants, welcome to round 1 of the Young Chef's Challenge," announced Chef Marcus Bellini, owner of Bellini's and head judge. His imposing figure commanded immediate silence. "Today's challenge: create a signature dish that represents your culinary point of view. You have 90 minutes starting now." Jake took a deep breath and focused on his plan. A reimagined New York deli sandwich, elevated with techniques he'd practiced obsessively in his home kitchen. His hands moved with surprising steadiness as he prepared a pastrami cured with his secret spice blend, a rye bread infused with caraway and honey, and a mustard aioli that balanced heat with sweetness. At the station directly across from him, a tall, lean boy with carefully styled hair worked with theatrical flourish. Jake recognized him immediately. Alessandro Ricci, son of the famous chef behind Ricci's, one of New York's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Their eyes met briefly, and Alessandro's expression shifted from curiosity to dismissal in a heartbeat. As Jake worked, he became aware of a camera crew circling the contestants, capturing footage for local news coverage of the event. Panic fluttered in his chest at the thought of his face broadcast on television, of Trevor and the others seeing him, of their inevitable mockery. He ducked his head lower, focusing intently on the delicate crosshatch pattern he was scoring into his bread. Halfway through the challenge, disaster struck. As Jake reached for his prepared brine, his elbow knocked against a container of salt, sending it spilling across his workstation. Frantically, he tried to salvage what he could, but precious minutes were lost. "Having trouble over there, big guy?" Alessandro asked, his voice low enough that only Jake could hear. "Maybe this kitchen's a little too cramped for you." Jake felt the familiar burn of shame, but forced it down. This wasn't high school. This was his territory. "Just adding some dramatic tension," he replied, surprising himself with his calm. "TV loves that stuff." Alessandro's smirk faltered slightly before he turned back to his own dish, what appeared to be a deconstructed lasagna with foam, a technique straight from his father's restaurant. With 20 minutes remaining, Jake realized he needed to pivot. There wasn't time to properly cure the pastrami as planned. Instead, he quickly adapted, using his knowledge of flavor profiles to create a different kind of sandwich, one inspired by the Korean grocery near his apartment. Bulgogi spiced beef, quick pickled vegetables, and a gochujang aioli on his honey rye bread. When time was called, Jake stood back from his creation, sweat dampening his shirt, uncertainty clouding his mind. It wasn't what he'd planned, but it was something true. The judges moved from station to station, their expressions inscrutable as they tasted each dish. When they reached Jake, Chef Bellini raised an eyebrow at the unexpected fusion. "Tell me about your dish," he said, his Italian accent thick but precise. Jake swallowed hard. "It's a New York sandwich, but not just one New York, my New York. Queens, where Korean markets sit next to Jewish delis, next to Italian bakeries, where flavors mix because people do." Chef Bellini took a bite, his expression unreadable. The other judges followed suit. One of them, a food critic Jake recognized from the local paper, nodded slightly. "Thank you," Chef Bellini said, before moving on to the next station. Alessandro's dish received lavish praise, as expected. His technique was flawless, his plating immaculate. Jake's stomach sank. He didn't belong here, among these polished young chefs with their culinary pedigrees. As the contestants gathered for the elimination announcement, Jake stood at the back, preparing himself for the walk of shame. Chef Bellini stepped forward with a list. "The following contestants will proceed to round 2. Names were called. Alessandro's, of course. Others Jake had noticed during the competition. The list continued, and with each name, Jake's hope diminished. And finally, Chef Bellini paused. "Jake Matthews." Jake's head snapped up. Had he heard correctly? The contestant beside him nudged him forward, and somehow his legs carried him to stand with the others who would continue to round 2. As they were dismissed, Chef Bellini approached Jake. "Your dish was imperfect," he said bluntly, "but it had something many others lacked: soul and honesty." He handed Jake a card. "Round 2 is in 2 weeks. It will be much harder. Be prepared." Outside the building, as contestants dispersed into the crisp New York evening, Alessandro stepped into Jake's path. "Enjoy your charity advancement," he said coldly. "Everyone knows you only made it through because they needed a diversity pick. The fat kid with a sob story makes good television." The words struck their target with precision, but Jake found himself standing straighter. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe my food just tasted better than yours." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "My family has been in the restaurant business for 3 generations. You're a nobody from Queens, playing at being a chef." "Then you have nothing to worry about in round 2, Jake replied, stepping around him and walking away, his heart pounding not with shame, but with something unfamiliar: pride. That night, Jake called Sarah from the payphone near his apartment, having promised to let her know the results. When he told her he'd advanced, her excited squeal made him hold the receiver away from his ear. "I knew it!" she exclaimed. "When can I taste this amazing sandwich?" The question caught him off guard. "You want to?" "I've been waiting months for you to share your cooking, Jake Matthews. Don't make me wait any longer." And so, for the first time, Jake invited someone other than his mother to taste his food. They arranged to meet at Central Park the following Saturday, where Jake would bring a picnic lunch featuring his competition dish. As he hung up the phone, Jake realized something had shifted inside him. The kitchen had always been his refuge, but perhaps it could also be his stage, his voice, and maybe, just maybe, people might actually want to listen. Chapter 3. The Boiling Point. The 2 weeks before round 2 passed in a blur of practice and preparation. Jake spent every spare moment in Mrs. Gonzalez's kitchen, refining techniques and developing new recipes. His picnic with Sarah had gone surprisingly well. She'd devoured his sandwich with genuine enthusiasm, asking questions about flavors and techniques that made Jake realize she was actually interested, not just being polite. "You're different when you talk about food," she'd observed, sitting cross-legged on the picnic blanket. "You forget to be self-conscious." The comment had stayed with him, a small flame of confidence he nurtured carefully. Round two's challenge was announced via email: regional Italian cuisine with an American twist. Jake knew immediately this was designed to favor Alessandro, whose family's restaurant specialized in elevated Italian cooking. But instead of discouragement, Jake felt a spark of determination. He'd spent hours at the library researching Italian cooking traditions, particularly those of Sicily, with its centuries of diverse cultural influences. The morning of the competition, Jake arrived early at the venue. This time, a professional kitchen set up in a convention center with space for a small audience. His heart sank when he spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Trevor and two other boys from school, pointing and laughing as he took his place at his station. "What are they doing here?" Sarah appeared beside him, her expression concerned. Jake shrugged, trying to appear unbothered. "Alessandro's in my calculus class. Must have mentioned the competition." "He invited them on purpose," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger, "to throw you off." Before Jake could respond, Chef Bellini called for the contestants' attention. "Today, you will create an Italian-American fusion dish. You have 2 hours. Your ingredients are limited to what is provided in our pantry. Begin!" Jake moved to the pantry, mentally cataloguing ingredients for his planned dish, a Sicilian-inspired arancini filled with New York deli pastrami and cheese, served with a tomato sauce infused with maple and bourbon. As he reached for arborio rice, Alessandro bumped into him hard. "Oops, didn't see you there," Alessandro smirked, though the narrow pantry made that claim ridiculous. "Actually, that's a lie. Kinda hard to miss." Jake bit back a retort, focusing instead on gathering his ingredients. When he returned to his station, however, he discovered his allotted cooking wine had been spilled, the bottle lying on its side. From the audience, Trevor's voice carried clearly. "Better lick it up, Jumbo Jake. We know you don't waste food." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jake froze, the familiar shame washing over him. Chef Bellini glanced sharply toward the disturbance, but said nothing, his attention diverted by another contestant's question. Jake stared at the spreading puddle of wine, feeling the competition slipping away before it had even begun. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Sarah standing at the edge of the audience area, her expression fiercely supportive. She mouthed what looked like, "You've got this." Drawing a deep breath, Jake grabbed a towel and cleaned up the spill. Then, instead of requesting more wine, he pivoted again. His mind raced through flavor profiles and techniques. If he couldn't have wine for his risotto, he'd use apple cider. There was a jug in the refrigerator section of the pantry. Not traditional, but potentially interesting, sweet and tangy where wine would be dry and complex. As he worked, Jake fell into the rhythm of cooking, his hands moving with practiced precision. He blocked out Trevor's occasional comments, Alessandro's smug glances, even the cameras that circulated capturing footage for the competition's social media. There was only the food, the process, the creation. When time was called, Jake stepped back from his completed dish. Apple cider arancini with pastrami and smoked Gouda, served with a maple bourbon tomato sauce and garnished with microgreens. It wasn't what he'd planned, but the aroma rising from the plate gave him confidence. The judges tasted each dish methodically. When they reached Jake's station, Chef Bellini raised an eyebrow at the description. Apple cider instead of wine. An unusual choice. Jake nodded. Sometimes you have to work with what you have, not what you planned for. Chef Bellini's expression remained neutral as he tasted the arancini. The texture is excellent. The flavor profile, unexpected, but cohesive. The pastrami brings a familiar New York element that grounds the dish. He made a note on his clipboard. Creative adaptation. Alessandro's dish, a deconstructed lasagna with elements of a New England clam bake, received similarly measured feedback, though Jake noticed Chef Bellini's expression tighten slightly at the elaborate presentation, which seemed designed to impress visually more than gustatorially. As the judges conferred, Jake found himself surprisingly calm. He'd done his best with the circumstances. Whatever happened next, he'd proven something to himself. The eliminations were announced, reducing the field from 15 to 8 contestants who would advance to the final round. Both Jake and Alessandro made the cut, setting up what the host dramatically called a culinary rivalry to watch in the finals. As the crowd dispersed, Trevor approached Jake's station, flanked by his usual sidekicks. "Still here, huh? Must be the pity vote. Or maybe they just need someone to eat all the leftovers." Jake began packing his knives, determined not to engage. But Alessandro, passing by, added, "Or maybe they need someone to make the rest of us look good by comparison." The before picture in a weight loss commercial. Something snapped in Jake, not in anger, but in clarity. He straightened to his full height, looking directly at Trevor, then Alessandro. "You know what? I used to think the same thing, that I was just the fat kid, the joke. But today, my food is going to the finals of a competition judged by one of New York's top chefs." "What did you do today, Trevor? Besides try to make someone else feel as small as you are?" Trevor's face flushed. But before he could respond, Sarah appeared at Jake's side. "Ready to go? We're meeting your mum for dinner to celebrate, remember?" It wasn't true. They had made no such plans, but Jake gratefully seized the lifeline. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked away, Sarah linked her arm through his. "That was amazing," she said quietly. "Both your cooking and what you just said." Jake's heart raced at her touch, but for once it wasn't from anxiety. "I don't know what came over me." "I do," Sarah replied. "You finally saw yourself the way other people see you, the way I see you." "And how's that?" Jake asked, hardly daring to believe this conversation was real. Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. As someone brave, talented, worth knowing. She hesitated, then added softly, "Worth caring about." In that moment, standing in the convention center parking lot with Sarah Chen, looking at him as though he were someone valuable, Jake felt something shift fundamentally inside him. The weight he'd carried wasn't just physical. It was the burden of believing he deserved the cruelty, that he was nothing more than what others saw. For the first time, he considered the possibility that they, and he, had been wrong all along. John Chapter 4, Rising. The finals of the Young Chefs Challenge coincided with the Manhattan Culinary Exhibition, guaranteeing a large audience and significant media coverage. As Jake entered the exhibition hall, the enormity of the moment threatened to overwhelm him. 8 finalists, 3 judges including Chef Bellini, and hundreds of spectators gathered in the vast space. His mother had taken the day off work, a rare occurrence, and sat in the front row wearing her best dress, the one usually reserved for church on Christmas. Beside her was Mrs. Gonzalez, and next to her, Sarah, who gave Jake a thumbs up when their eyes met. The final challenge was announced. Create a 3-course meal that tells your personal culinary story. You have 3 hours. Jake had prepared for this, mentally outlining a menu that traced his journey from the comfort foods of his childhood to the diverse influences of his Queens neighborhood to his aspirations for the future. As he gathered his ingredients, he noticed Alessandro watching him with narrowed eyes. "Planning another sob story on a plate?" Alessandro asked quietly. Jake continued selecting his produce, no longer rattled by the taunts. "Planning to let my food speak for itself," he replied. "You should try it sometime." Alessandro's confident facade cracked slightly. "My father says this competition is mine to lose. The Ricci name means something in this industry." Jake met his gaze steadily. "Then I guess your food better live up to your name." The cooking began in earnest, each contestant working with focused intensity. Jake moved with newfound confidence, his hands steady as he prepared his first course. a refined tomato soup with grilled cheese croutons, an homage to the simple meal his mother made on rainy days when he was young. For his main course, he created a fusion dish that represented his current culinary perspective, a Korean-spiced braised short rib served with Italian gnocchi and a Queens-inspired sauce that incorporated elements from the diverse neighborhood restaurants he'd grown up visiting. His dessert was the most ambitious, a deconstructed apple pie with elements that hinted at his future aspirations, techniques he'd studied but never attempted until now, flavors that pushed boundaries while remaining grounded in comfort. Halfway through the competition, Jake glanced up to see Trevor hovering at the edge of the audience. Their eyes met briefly, and to Jake's surprise, Trevor gave an awkward nod that might have been encouragement before disappearing into the crowd. The gesture was small, insignificant to anyone else, but to Jake it represented something profound, the possibility of change, of growth, not just in himself, but in others. As the final minutes ticked down, disaster struck. Jake's dessert component, a delicate apple crisp tuile, shattered as he attempted to plate it. With only seconds remaining, he had to make a split-second decision: panic or adapt. Taking a deep breath, he quickly repurposed the broken pieces, arranging them artfully around the plate's rim, transforming what would have been a structural element into a textural one. When time was called, he stepped back from his creation, exhausted but satisfied. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The judges moved from station to station, tasting and evaluating each three-course meal. When they reached Jake's station, Chef Bellini studied the plates carefully before tasting. "Tell me about your journey," he said simply. Jake found the words coming easily now. "My first course is where I began. Comfort food made with love, the kind my mum made when things were tough. The main course is my present, a mix of influences from my neighborhood, cultures coming together on one plate, and the dessert—" He hesitated, looking at the imperfect creation. "The dessert is about adaptation, about taking what breaks and making it into something new, something that might even be better than what you planned." Chef Bellini nodded slowly as he tasted each course. "The soup is perfect in its simplicity. The main course shows technical skill and cultural understanding, and the dessert—" He paused, studying the broken tuile pieces. "The dessert shows wisdom. Many chefs never learn that mistakes often lead to the most interesting creations." Alessandro's presentation was technically flawless, a progression of Italian classics reinterpreted with modern techniques. The judges praised his precision and skill, and Jake's confidence wavered. How could his homey, personal food compete with such technical perfection? As the judges conferred, Jake found himself surprisingly at peace. Winning would be incredible, life-changing even, but he realized he'd already gained something invaluable: self-acceptance. For the first time, he'd put himself, his real self, not the defensive, self-deprecating version he showed the world, out there for judgment, and found he could survive it, whatever the outcome. Chef Bellini stepped forward with the results. "Today, we've seen extraordinary talent from every contestant. The decision was difficult, but unanimous." The hall fell silent as he opened the envelope containing the winner's name. The winner of this year's Young Chefs Challenge, receiving a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America and an apprenticeship at Bellini's restaurant, is Jake Matthews. The audience erupted in applause. Jake stood frozen in disbelief until his mother's joyful cry broke through his shock. She rushed forward, enveloping him in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "I'm so proud." Mrs. Gonzalez was next, beaming with teacher's pride. "I told you," she said simply, "a gift." And then Sarah was there, her smile radiant. "You did it," she said, and before Jake could respond, she leaned up and kissed his cheek quickly. As Jake accepted the award from Chef Bellini, he caught sight of Alessandro standing to the side. Their eyes met, and after a moment of tension, Alessandro gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not friendship, but respect. It was enough. In the days that followed, Jake's life transformed rapidly. Local news covered his win, featuring his story of overcoming bullying through culinary passion. The school principal called an assembly to recognize his achievement, and the same hallways where he'd once tried to make himself invisible now filled with congratulations. Trevor approached him in the cafeteria, awkwardly extending his hand. "That was pretty cool what you did," he admitted grudgingly. "My dad watched it on the news. He's a cook at Denny's. Said your food looked amazing." Jake shook the offered hand, understanding the incomplete apology for what it was, the beginning of someone else's transformation. His apprenticeship at Bellini's began on weekends, his white chef's coat still feeling like a costume he was borrowing rather than an identity he'd earned. But each shift brought new confidence, new skills, new validation. On a cool Saturday evening, a month after the competition, Jake finished his shift early and met Sarah outside the restaurant. She'd been there every weekend, waiting to hear about his day, genuinely interested in every new technique he learned. "Chef Bellini let me create a special tonight," Jake told her excitedly as they walked through the West Village. "A sandwich inspired by the one I made for our picnic. It's sold out." Sarah bumped her shoulder against his. "Of course it did. It was amazing." They stopped at Washington Square Park, sitting on a bench as street musicians played nearby. Jake found himself studying Sarah's profile in the fading light, gathering courage. "Sarah," he began hesitantly, "I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time." She turned to him, her expression open, expectant. "Yes." "Would you—" He took a deep breath. "Would you want to go to prom with me?" The words hung between them for a moment, before Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Jake Matthews, I thought you'd never ask." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Jake reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The weight of others' perceptions had lifted, revealing the person he'd always been beneath. Someone with talent, with value, with something meaningful to offer the world. He wasn't naive enough to believe all his insecurities had vanished, or that life would be smooth sailing from here. There would be other challenges, other doubts, other obstacles to overcome. But he'd found something essential: the courage to be seen, to take up space, to believe that his voice and his food deserved to be heard and tasted. Sarah's hand found his on the bench between them, her fingers intertwining with his with easy affection. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Jake smiled, no longer hiding behind humor or self-deprecation. "I'm thinking that sometimes the heaviest things we carry aren't physical at all, and I'm thinking I'm finally ready to put them down." As the city lights began to twinkle around them, Jake Matthews, chef, son, friend, and perhaps something more, felt lighter than he ever had before.